Faoii betrayer. Alanna Harkin will do whatever it takes to save her brother. 2 centuries after the Godfell War, Alanna knows that the only way to survive in Clearwall is to be faster and smarter than everyone else. She stays on her toes, steals what she needs, and never, ever mentions magic. Because magic is the way of the Faoii, and witches get burned in Clearwall. Being silent isn't always enough, though. When her brother starts manifesting mysterious powers, Alanna knows they don't have much time. Hunted across Clearwall, the siblings must unbury a lifetime's worth of lies and secrets with the help of unlikely allies, or find themselves lashed to the pyre like all the Faoii that came before. Faoii Betrayer is riveting and a highly anticipated second novel in the Faoii Chronicles. The Faoii Betrayer. Written by Tahani Nelson. Narrated by Sara Morsey. Available on Amazon.com and Audible. So welcome to my review of the second book in this series, The Faoii Betrayer. Now, before I move into my review, I want to make something clear that I said in my previous review of the first book. I mentioned that this book reminded me of, and by this book I mean the first book, reminded me of Elder Scrolls, the video game series by Bethesda. And I just want to clarify, I'm not saying the story itself was like the video games. I'm saying that the story, the elements, everything that was used in the story felt like it was part of that world. It felt like if Bethesda wanted, they could look at this book and make a video game out of it, expanding into their world of the Elder Scrolls. Like this is some unknown part of that world. I know it's not, but that's just how I feel that this book represents itself. And this will all be important later on in my review. So let's begin with the cover. This cover is pretty much exactly like the previous cover. However, I do want to mention that this time the cover received an award. Moving on to the title. The title is spot on for the story. I couldn't really find any fault with the title. It was right on base with what it should be. It doesn't reveal too much about the story. It doesn't spoil anything about the story at all. So that's very good. Now moving into the story. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm starting to get the feeling this entire series is going to remind me of Elder Scrolls. This, however, really, really felt a lot like Elder Scrolls. See, in Elder Scrolls, one of the ongoing things that tends to happen in the games is you have an event, okay? When Morrowind came out, you had an event that happened, and you played through that event. Then, Oblivion came out, but the events of Oblivion did not take place right after the events of Morrowind. In fact, those events during Oblivion took place like hundreds of years later from the time of Morrowind. When you move into Skyrim, even more time has passed since the time of Morrowind and since the time of Oblivion. I think this time around it was like 100 years or so. The same is true with this story, and this is not something I've seen very commonly done in a book series. Usually, in most book series, you have a much smaller amount of time that passes between the books, because so much history can be built up in the more time you put between books. And you've got so much more to explain. This happens in the Elder Scroll games, and it happens in this book. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No, not really. So, I've also noticed that in my previous videos, I also don't talk about the stories quite enough. Let me go over the story. You have this brother and sister who basically are beggars and thieves. Well, I mean, they don't really beg, but they live off what they can steal or take. And they're fighting to survive. The brother starts having visions, starts mumbling about things he shouldn't know. And it turns out that the sister had these same things, but she refused to let this gift manifest herself. So, basically, throughout the book, she has to save her brother. She has to escape the bad situation they're in. And that leads them from one event to another. I do want to point out that the progression in this story was much better than the first book. It did not seem rather forced like I had mentioned with the first book, where things just kind of happened and all the right answers came at all the right times and they got exactly what they needed, exactly when it was needed. It took some real effort on the parts of the main characters. There were some things that I got a little mixed up on, but by the end of the book, it was definitely all spelled out for you. I got pretty good resolution to some things I was starting to get confused on, because the book honestly begins very differently, with very different kind of theme going on, and it wasn't too clear that so much time had passed between the first and second book. But as you start to learn these things, you start to realize, oh, okay, I see what's going on here, and this is what this is. There are some events that it was like, maybe I missed it, but I wasn't quite sure how some people were there. One person I know exactly. They do a pretty good job of explaining it, or I should say the author does a really good job of explaining it in her book. So that was fine. I just thought going into the book, this is going to pick up right where the last book left off, and it didn't. So I was a little thrown when I was like, oh, this is 200 years later. Oh, okay. But other than that, the story progressed really good, and I was really happy with it. Also, I want to point out that the author mentioned the word Faoii a lot less, from what I could tell. So, that was one big issue, that it felt that in the previous book, the word Faoii was said a little too much. So, moving on to narration. The narration was just like before, with no difference. Moving on to characters. The characters were fine. Everybody was written quite well. Perfect reasoning for everybody to have the characteristics they had. Nobody seemed overpowered. Nobody seemed to just get things and know things that they shouldn't get or know without working for it. There was enough conflict and there was enough characterization between all the characters, side characters, main characters. the villains, and you really do want to see the villains get their comeuppance. So the characters were pretty good. I would honestly say they were a little better this time around. If I had to point out a negative, and I think this would go more under the story aspect rather than the characters, so I'm going to backtrack just a little bit back in the story here. But one big negative, I guess, I have with the book is you don't get enough of the land. And you got a little bit of a wider scape of the land in the first book. You had several different locations. I mean, they were all pretty close. It seemed in the book that all these locations were pretty close together. And in this book, it seemed like the author shortened her play area. See, I've always described writing a book as an author who's playing around with toys. And I just feel like this author took herself from a big room to a smaller room, where she could only have less toys to play with, less action figures to have fun with. And I guess that would be my biggest negative. I would definitely, in the future, would love to see much broader scale of what's going on in this world, how the events in this small area, this kingdom, are affecting the larger world, neighboring kingdoms and towns and villages. Are they the only ones affected by the events that go on in the book? Or is the entire world being affected? And if so, how are they affected? Just some ideas that I thought I would like to see. If I don't, I mean, it's up to the writer. But I, can't write that book for her. Just my idea that I would like to see in a future book moving forward in the series. So moving on to extras. And for extras, like I said, I don't really have much to say here. The ending was, in my opinion, a lot better than the first book. I really don't have much. I mean, yes, this is definitely an improvement over the previous book, but not by much, I'm afraid. It is good. It does do things a lot better than the first book did, but that stuff that makes it better came at a cost. And in this aspect, the cost was kind of shrunken down. You do mainly just follow these two children throughout the entire book. So for this book, Faoii Betrayer, I'm going to give it a score of 8 out of 10. Like I said, I really came close to putting this as a 7 out of 10, just because it was almost on the same level as the first book. But it did do several things better, and I really enjoyed those better things. I just feel like that it came at a cost where, like I said, the entire area was... Most of the time, you're in this city, or you're in this rogue rebellion camp, or you're in the past, or the future. I don't want to really spoil this part, but I guess if you're watching this, you're deciding whether you want to check the book out, so I don't want to really spoil too much. I do want to say, though, this is a better book. This is better than the first. So, I think my 8 out of 10 is a fair score. Now, moving forward in the series, I would love to see what else this author can do. I want to see where else the story can go. Because this one kind of almost felt like it wrapped up pretty nicely. Like, this could be the end of it. Unless she goes back and fills in a gap, or goes way, way back and makes kind of a prequel. I'm completely lost as to where the story's going to go now. We got the answers to what happened after book 1. And we saw the outcome of what happens after. So, yeah, except for expanding beyond and going across the world or something, I don't know what else this author's going to be able to do. I am kind of intrigued. The epilogue did kind of give you a hint, maybe that something bigger is coming. But if she does stay on this route where, like I said, with Elder Scrolls, you always get these large time gaps between games. And if she does that same thing, yes, it's rare that authors will do this. I'm sure it's been done by other authors. I want to see where it goes moving forward. If you enjoyed this review, please consider picking up your copy today on Audible or Amazon. I do want to say that the price is definitely going to be worth it because this is a very long book. This actually took me longer to complete than the previous book. So if you like something that's a good long read, that's going to capture your attention and suck you in for a longer period of time, then if you read the first book and you liked it, the second book is really on par, and you're going to enjoy every minute of it. If you are a self-published author and you would like me to review your audiobook, please visit my website. It'll be in the description below, along with this author's website, who will also be in the description below. If you could, please subscribe to my channel. It would help me out a great deal. And share the video and give it a like. Let me know if you agree with my review or you don't. If you've read this book and you think that I'm right, please, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I want to thank you all for watching. Please subscribe today. And to all my fellow writers out there, happy writing.